Okay.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need you to.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and once again, we have a reoccurring guest, which is a colleague of mine. I really enjoy picking his brain. He is the co-founder of Scholars for 911 Truth, Professor Kevin Barrett. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Rashid, good to be with you.
Let's jump right into it, Professor. I hear a lot of people talking about Trump, and some people think I jump on Trump, but I've been giving the business to Biden and Obama and everybody else too. But these people seem to think that Trump is a little bit different and that he's trying to change course for America and that he has no connection with the Jewish elite. I know that you know a little bit about his history, his start, and his funders. Would you please tell us a little bit about his connections and how he made his money and his connections with the Jewish or the Zionists, I should say, for YouTube's sake, the Zionist power brokers?
Well, yeah, this is a good time to talk about that because he just gave that speech to the Knesset in Israel just yesterday, I think, and you have to see it to believe it. I mean, the part about Miriam Adelson, right? She was there in the Israeli Knesset, and so he singled her out. Basically, said that she and her husband had these huge bank accounts, $60 billion in the bank. Not bad, Miriam. And with that money, you bought me. Basically, he says you bought me, and Sheldon, he gave me hundreds of millions of dollars, and so he would come to the White House, and I'd say, no, you can't just come to the White House any time of day and expect to get in. That's not how it works. But I'd let him in anyway. And then he goes on and says that that Miriam Adelson, he says, oh yeah, she's more loyal to Israel than the United States, right? He says, Miriam, I don't want to embarrass you, but I asked you, which you were more loyal to, and you wouldn't answer me, and I took that as meaning Israel. So, I mean, it's like a comedy routine, and I think it's really just Trump's stream of consciousness, and he resents being a slave of the Chosenites at some level, maybe partly unconsciously, but he enjoys the perks that come with it, being a billionaire or whatever, fake billionaire or whatever. And so it's kind of hard to say whether he's gotten fed up here and there. I think, the reports were that he was unhappy with Israel bombing Qatar, which is America's tightest ally in the region. Like, it's basically one big American Air Force base. And the Israelis went and bombed Qatar. Qatar does America's bidding in the region by basically, tempering everything to try to, calm things down, because the whole region is like sick of the way it's been treated. So Qatar, kind of keeps the communication channels open to all of these parties that are getting fed up with the Zionist genocide and with the Americans who are paying for it, and then tries to resolve things calmly in a way that benefits the United States. So Qatar is an invaluable American ally, but the Israelis, well, Netanyahu at least, and those people, they hate Qatar, because Qatar is, they don't want somebody to be mediating between the Americans and the region. They want to just totally control everything. So they bombed Qatar, right? And that pissed Trump off. I believe, because it caused, well, his team anyway, because it caused a huge problem. And that pushed them into forcing this peace plan down Netanyahu's throat. And this, of course, the so-called peace plan is actually essentially the surrender. Netanyahu surrendered, right? I mean, his stated war objectives were to get the hostages back through military action, and he failed. And then to eliminate Hamas, and he totally failed. Hamas was still blowing up Israeli tanks right up to the last day. So that situation is still, very fraught. So let's go back and answer your question of, like, what's Trump's relation with these Zionists that he seems to have a kind of a love-hate relationship with, right? I mean, he's supposed to be their their loyal servant because they made him. And he is, as he said to the Knesset, not without resentment in the undertone of his voice, he's given more to Israel than all the other American presidents combined. No matter how much Israel pressured the other presidents, they wouldn't give them Jerusalem. They wouldn't give them the Golan Heights, but I did, right? So why would Trump, that's true. So why has Trump been willing to completely blow off American interests in favor of Israeli interests to an extent that not even any other Zionist-owned American president would ever be allowed to do by the American security complex? And the answer to that is that Trump is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the worst part of the Zionist mafia. And we can trace that back to Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn made Donald Trump. There would be no Donald Trump today. I mean, the man would exist, but his net worth probably wouldn't be that much more than yours or mine. I hope yours is a little more than mine. But anyway, Trump is made there, and Cohn made him. And a lot of people suspect there was a homosexual relationship going on there. Cohn was, much older man, a really notorious pervert. He's a pedophile, but he liked young guys up to beyond the teenage years, and I think Trump was like 20 or something like that. And they were photographed going around all but like holding hands and blowing kisses to each other. And so Trump basically was walking him around on a leash, walking Trump, his pet boy toy Trump, when Trump was like 20, and he was making him into what he became. Well, what's that? Well, Roy Cohn was the Jewish mafia guy from New York. He was, part of this sort of loose network of Jewish organized crime figures that was most powerful member was Meyer Lansky, the financier to the entire organized crime outfit, whatever ethnicity, the Jewish one, but there's also all these other ethnic groups. And they all were Lansky could basically order any of them killed because he had the most money. He was a banker to the mob. And so Roy Cohn ran New York for Lansky and his friends. And he's a lawyer. So he was like the big time mob lawyer. But he did a lot more than just lawyering, that's for sure. He had these huge Jeffrey Epstein style parties, except they're a lot worse than Epstein's because, Epstein's for the most part featured, girls, at least, who had puberty, right? And this guy, Roy Cohn, he's like, we're talking prepubescent boys. And God knows what was done to some of them. So it was really nasty. And he invited J. Edgar Hoover to these shindigs. J. Edgar Hoover, diddled little boys and was filmed doing it. And Meyer Lansky had all the film. And Roy Cohn was the guy who hosted the parties. He was the worse than Jeffrey Epstein at that time. And so he's the guy who created Donald Trump. And Trump inherited a fair bit of money, which he would have lost immediately. The guy is totally incompetent, total, airbrain. But essentially he got some guidance, he got some more money, and he was built up into the money laundering business. Trump built basically hotels and casinos. Now, casinos in particular are money laundering establishments. That's what they're for, right? Yeah, people gamble and the house takes a cut. Yeah, they make some money that way. But they make a lot more money by money laundering. People come in and buy $1 zillion worth of chips, and then they gamble a couple of them. They go and cash those $1 zillion worth of chips back into cash. And guess what? It's nice, fresh, clean money with no traces, no numbers on the bills, whatever. So that's what Trump did. He set up money laundering operations for the mob, and he would milk them, and they would launder money, and he would take his cut. And at some point, it wasn't a real business, so it would go bankrupt. And that's why Trump went through a number. I can't even count. I forget how many bankruptcies, but many of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he never paid his workers, of course. He's a mobster, total mobbed up moron. Like he's probably never read a book in his life. So that's who we're talking about. But guess what? He's a talented showman who has a hypnotic way of, you can't keep, smart people can't keep their eyes off him because it's like a train wreck. And the not so smart people like, oh, wow, they're entertained, they're dazzled. And then, he got a little bit of help, and, what kind of lines can he use to become a great, populist, neo-Führer or whatever. And so that's how he's been led through his entire career by Jewish organized crime. And so it's not surprising that, one of the biggest mobsters in history, Sheldon Adelson, who I was told, by the way, be careful what you say about Sheldon. He has people killed. It was a former CIA Black Ops guy told me that. He said, this, you got to know like what it is that gets people killed. And he said, if you got actionable intelligence, like stuff that can actually cause things to happen, like for instance, testimony, you could offer testimony and there's a court case where you're likely to offer it and they'll kill you. If you're ready, if you can leverage certain kinds of information that they don't want out in such a way that it's going to be forced down the throat of the mainstream, they'll kill you. And then he said, they'll kill you just because they don't like you. If I mean, that doesn't happen that often, but if somebody like Adelson, a mafia kingpin, takes a personal dislike to somebody who's bad-mouthing him on the internet, it's conceivable that they'll have you killed, because it's like he does this all day, every day, is pays people to kill people. Well, maybe not quite every day, but it's part of what he does. So, and he knows all the people that he can pay to do it. And it's not that expensive compared to what he's got in the bank. So anyway, this is the kind of people we're dealing with, and they own Trump. And the Adelsons became kind of the point men for the Jewish mob that put Trump into the White House with the express, quid pro quo, that his job was to rip up the Iran nuclear agreement, which was in the interest of the U.S., but not in the interest of Israel, that Obama had signed. And then to hand Israel Jerusalem, Al-Quds on a silver platter, hand them the Golan Heights on a silver platter, and basically bend over for them and do anything. So that's been Trump's job from day one. And he's pretty much done it, maybe until now. Now, at this point, the surface level interpretation of what's going on with this Gaza ceasefire is that Trump and or the national security state behind him has yanked on Bibi's choke chain and said, that's enough. And this is possible because the Jewish establishment, the billionaire Jews that run everything, they know that this genocide's bad for Israel. And Israel's not going to be there in a much shorter period of time, real soon, if this keeps going. So they got to stop it, really. And so Trump, and then Trump himself, he wants that Nobel Peace Prize. So, maybe he's invested his ego in getting a Nobel Peace Prize by bringing peace to that region. And if he did invest his ego in that project, that's a pretty big investment. So maybe that's the good side of this crazed, the mad Emperor Trump. But in any case, I don't have a whole lot of faith that anything great is really going to come out of this in the long term. It's likely to go back to just more Zionist genocide. We've seen nonstop Zionist genocide since 1948. The Israeli snipers shooting Palestinian kids for sport. It's just a regular daily occurrence there. The crazed settlers coming in and raping and attacking people and stoning people and killing people. It just goes on and on and on, stealing more land than Israel, planning to attack this country, extend the Golan Heights further into Syria, grab more of South Lebanon, ultimately aiming for everything between the Nile and the Euphrates. And is the U.S. deep state and Trump are they really going to stop this? Are the liberal Jews who realize that this is a crazed messianic millenarian fantasy that can never really happen, are they going to rein it in? I don't know. But that's what we really have in the White House. It's like the QAnon fantasy that Trump's going to save the day. Sorry to disabuse you folks, but that's not the way it works.
And while you were talking, I was just thinking about some of the things that were told to me about how there are constant flights of military planes with cargo planes that arrive in Israel daily. So is this just a ploy by the U.S. and Israel to buy time before it's the Israeli-Iranian War 2.0, because they were embarrassed by the Iranians they had to capitulate and beg for a ceasefire after the 12-day war. And we know that the ego of the Zionist regime and those in the U.S. is that they will not allow for they won't take it or accept it in such a way, so they will plan for get back. And so I always say that the empire, when it's losing, they want to rest, rearm, and recalibrate. Is this the moment that they're resting, rearming, and recalibrating so that they can go head on with Iran? Because Iran, again, if they can take Iran out, they believe that they can then stop the Belt and Road Initiative, the North-South corridor. They can be in China's underbelly, Pakistan's underbelly, India's underbelly. They can rule Russia's underbelly, and they can take Central Asia or Eurasia as Brzezinski wanted it to happen. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that might be what they're thinking. Maybe somebody is dreaming of basically destroying Iran the way they've destroyed Libya and Syria and Iraq and Sudan and Lebanon to some extent. So yeah, that might be on their minds. Destroy Iran and then put a replacement for Bagram Air Base, right? Trump has been threatening to reinvade Afghanistan and steal Bagram Air Base, just like he's threatening everybody. He's threatening to steal Canada and Greenland from Denmark and the Panama Canal, and he's gunboats are off the coast of Venezuela and on and on and on. He's got this huge trade war going with China now, threatening to send these long-range missiles to Ukraine to pound Russian infrastructure far from the border, all this kind of crazy stuff. I mean, this is not really a guy who's anywhere near earning any Nobel Peace Prize at this point. Of course, not that the Nobel Prize Committee ever gives it to anybody but evil warmongers anyway. But yeah, that Iran project is probably, maybe on the back burner or maybe not so far back, right? Yeah, it's hard to say. They did get pounded, as you say. And it's hard to see that anything has changed fundamentally that's going to lead to a different outcome. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing. So what did they accomplish last time by attacking Iran? Well, they really pissed off the Iranian people. They caused them to rally behind the most hardline elements of their government. they got Tel Aviv pounded, totally pounded, and in a demonstration that the Israelis cannot stop Iranian rocket attacks. They got the enriched uranium, which is enriched up to 60%, which is the hard part's all done. That's enough for 10 or 20 nuclear bombs. All that 60% enriched uranium is now gone, and we're getting it up to 90% to build a bomb is a piece of cake. So it's disappeared somewhere. It's all somewhere in Iran, and you can turn it into a bomb. Pretty much, you can further get the enrichment up to 90% in any kitchen that you want, apparently. So do they, rather than preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon and being sure that it's not developing one, they got themselves an Iran that very well might have a nuclear weapon. And frankly, if I were in charge of Iran, I think I would lean towards building one or buying it from North Korea, which I'm sure is more than willing to sell. They might already have one even. I mean, who knows? But the attack on Iran did not really get the Zionists anywhere. It didn't get the Americans anywhere. It backfired and blew up in their face. So are they really going to try another one? Hard to say. So that's why when Putin says that Israel gave him a message to pass on to Iran at the recent the Shanghai Nations meeting in Tajikistan or whatever, Putin says, yeah, the Israelis told me to pass the message to the Iranians that Israel does not want any more conflict with Iran. Well, maybe they're just setting them up, right? Like some kind of a boxer who kind of looks direction, but they do that, right? I mean, Trump helped them do misdirection. He set up fake negotiations, and then right when the Iranians had faith that these fake negotiations were real, boom, Israel pounded them with a sneak attack with Trump's connivance. And same thing that they did when they killed Soleimani. They invited Soleimani to a diplomatic meeting in Saudi Arabia that was supposed to involve a recalibration of U.S.-Iranian relations. They dangled that in front of him and lured him into Iraq and killed him. So you can't trust these people at all, obviously. And so I'd say about 50-50 really, whether they are going to restart this war with Iran sometime in the next year or not.
See, and the reason I lean more towards the restart of the war, all we have to do is look at history. Every time they wanted to negotiate with Hamas, they assassinated the negotiators. When they wanted to, they came to an agreement with Nasrallah. They assassinated him in his top.
Well, they missed the Hamas guys in Qatar.
Yeah.
They killed other people. They killed random people. Yeah.
And when they wanted to, they pretended they wanted to negotiate with Assad. They overthrew him. Then they pretended that even the United States pretended that they wanted to negotiate with Russia. And while the negotiations were going on, remember, quote unquote, Ukraine hit the strategic air bases of Russia. So every time the U.S. or Israel finds itself in trouble and they need a breather, they rest, rearm, and recalibrate by misdirection. So I would not, not even on my worst day, believe the message that was sent by Netanyahu, because he's untrustworthy, and he has openly stated that his objective is to destroy Iran. And so if that's what you have been stating for over a decade or two, and you have been trying to eliminate all of my allies from in Yemen to Syria to Lebanon, my thing is to be on alert and to say, well, okay, I'll accept what you're saying, but I'll keep my powder dry.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they're doing that in Iran. And I don't know, where it's going to go. I do think, though, that when you analyze it just kind of coldly as a grand chessboard, as Brzezinski's book called it, that it's not in the interests of either the U.S. or Israel to pursue these crazy extremist policies that Netanyahu has been pursuing. That the war with Iran is the worst possible thing that could happen from a kind of a U.S. empire geostrategic perspective. And Brzezinski repeatedly, warned us of that, and probably was appalled by 9/11, which was, of course, an Israeli job, and the wars that followed, which were mainly for the benefit of Israel, squandering trillions of dollars of American resources and a lot of American lives, as well as a lot more non-American lives, all to try to basically destroy the region for Israel. And that, that even isn't even really good for Israel, because in the long run, it just angers people. And I think that there's an arrogance right now in the Netanyahu camp. These people are drunk on their either messianic fantasies, like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, members of Netanyahu's cabinet, these extremist religious maniacs, or sort of drunk on their ego, like Netanyahu himself. Although he does come from a family where his father was a professor, was very interested in Jewish messianic thought. So he's got a certain messianic strain himself. And so there's these irrational, crazy, aggressive gamblers around the Netanyahu camp. And I think Trump is owned by people who lean in that direction, the Adelson family and so on. But the majority of Jews in the United States, and probably maybe half or so, maybe not quite half in Europe, but I would say probably a slim plurality, at least in the diaspora, doesn't think that Netanyahu's policies are viable. Thomas Friedman is one example. He's a very hardcore, rabid Zionist lunatic, but he's not stupid. And he looks at the chessboard and says, this is just not a good move. Attacking Iran is not a good move for Israel. Figuring out a way to deal with Iran is, but, just basically forcing Iran into this position of doubling down on its commitment to end the Jewish state, that's be a lot easier to try to wean Iran from that commitment by reasonable behavior, at which point, after a while, Iran would be happy to say, okay, we'll let the Palestinians decide what to do with Palestine. And if they're willing to do a two-state solution with you guys, well, that's okay. Now, boom, the whole problem has just disappeared. Iran's no longer a problem for Israel, right? That would be the smart way to deal with Iran. As what Netanyahu's doing is, making it clear that Israel is this huge threat to Iran, and they're crazy, and they're expanding towards their messianic borders of, river to the river and all of that. It just makes the whole region say, hey, Iran is right. These people are hopeless. They have to be completely eradicated, or we'll never have peace in this region. So it's a huge backfire from the standpoint of any rational person thinking about Israel's real interests in protecting what they've gained so far. All they really need to do is withdraw to those 67 borders, which are grossly unfair, but they'll get away with it. The Palestinians will put up with it, and that'll make the Iranians put up with it. And yeah, there'll be a lot of us, including myself, who will be campaigning nonviolently to, end the Zionist entity. But people will not organize to pick up the gun to do it anymore. So that's all they have to do is go back to the 67 borders. But it may be a little late for that now after this genocide and this crazed behavior that they've been, it's been getting worse and worse now for years. And these last 2 years have been so intolerable that nobody in this region, and probably the world even, that has any sense wants to take a chance on letting that kind of a state continue.
I want to go back to 9/11 but before we do that, and you said no, the policies are not rational. When people become panicked and when people become desperate, rationality goes out the window. And if we look at Israel as a state, it is financially bankrupt. It's morally bankrupt and ethnically bankrupt, but it's financially bankrupt. If it wasn't for the billions pumped in from the US, the UK, and the EU, it would not even be viable as we speak right now. But time is against the US right now, economically and geopolitically. So maybe in their thinking, they look at Iran as a piece, because if they can get Iran, as some of the think tanks said, then they could prevent China from having the Belt and Road Initiative. They would have China's economy wrapped up, because remember, the United States had a plan to control China's rise through the first and second island chain. And if China got out of line, to cut off its trade in the Malacca Strait. And China got smart and reopened up the Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, across land and cross air routes across land. So this goes through the heart of Central and West Asia, making connectivity between nations easier. So if war breaks out, then China economy would not be at the mercy of a naval blockade or whatever. And with the United States losing on every front economically and geopolitically, maybe the crazies are thinking we have to take Iran out. We have to, because that is central to the Belt and Road Initiative and Russia's and Iran's north-south corridor. And if we could stop that, we can stop China's rise. We can prevent Russia's full reemergence as a global power, and we can use Iran as our proxy in West Asia, or what they term the Middle East, and we can live to fight another day. Maybe that's their rationale for attacking Iran, even though they see that it's a Hail Mary pass. It's fourth and 30 with 20 seconds to go, and maybe that's the only pass that they have left in their thinking.
Yeah, that's possible. I think the hardcore, rabid extremist neocon types are probably the ones who are concerned about the American empire as well as the Israeli empire might be thinking that way. Wouldn't surprise me at all. They're probably thinking, well, we lost to Russia, and if we fight China directly right now, we're going to lose to China, and it's getting worse all the time. So let's go for the weakest link in this of these three big countries that are not taking our orders. And Iran is not only the weakest, but they're also kind of the most hardcore in terms of having a serious ideology that challenges the Western ideology. And so, yeah, that's possible. Just like it's also possible that they'll attack Venezuela, which is another sort of possible weak link and prize. Like it's close by, it's easy to get to, unlike Iran. It's close to the United States. closer than anybody who would ever support them is. So they have a lot of leverage there, and it would be more thinkable, I suppose, to try to invade Venezuela than to go after Russia or China directly. But then Iran would be the next one in line for the reasons that you just suggested. I think that a sane manager of the empire like Brzezinski was would say, right, we want to peel off Iran, so it's not part of this Russia, China, Iran bloc. Right? Brzezinski was very clear about that. He said, the nightmare scenario for the U.S. empire would be having Iran join this Russia, China bloc. It had, first Russia and China come together. If that ever happened, that would be bad enough. And then if Iran leaned towards that bloc, then it's all over. Then the United States empire faces a hopeless challenge. So what they've done is they've driven those three countries together. And the more hostile they are, the more they drive them together. So their thinking is flawed. Their thinking is basically so mired in this aggression that all they can think about is like attacking somebody and demonizing these people and attacking them, and not realizing that strategically it would be smarter to kind of woo them, and wean them away from these other countries. Like, a sane U.S. empire could easily have maintained decent relations with Russia, with China, and indeed with Iran, or at least with one or two of those countries, while playing hardball with the third. And I would have thought China would be the one they would have to play hardball with if they really care about continuing to totally dominate the world, which is a stupid project in the first place. But instead, by just brutally attacking all these countries, they're driving them all together. And so this attacking Iran, threatening to attack Iran again, is ensuring that there's never going to be a Western-friendly Iran. Iran actually, had the American empire played its cards right, it could have had a grand bargain with Iran back in the early 2000s after 9/11, when both the U.S. and Iran were happy to take down the Taliban, right? And they came really close, and then they blew it because of the Zionists. The Zionists would not allow that to happen. But if the U.S. had been run by Americans rather than Israelis, the Americans would have seized that moment, and there have been a few others too, and had their grand bargain with Iran. And Iran would have ended up being a U.S.-friendly but neutral country that would not be, doing anything to seriously threaten U.S. strategic interests. But as it is, they forced Iran to be completely, hardline and more hardline anti-U.S. than anybody in the world. Because Iran has no choice, because they keep getting attacked. The way the West is behaving towards them, the way the U.S. is behaving in particular, and allowing its rabid attack dog over in Israel to behave, forces Iran into this position. And so, yes, and I think this irrational sort of paranoid aggression is, it's partly just a normal thing, I guess, for leaders of states, but it's also, I think, the Jewish, I guess we're not supposed to say that word. So, okay, the Zionist domination of the United States, because the Zionists, as a religious ethnic group, took over America after World War II. Before that, America had been a WASP, or white Anglo-Saxon Protestant-led country. And the Catholics had, been in there fighting for their share. But post-World War II, the Zionists became the most powerful American ethnic group and seized power in the 1963 coup d'etat by murdering President Kennedy, and kind of cemented things with their coup d'etat on 9/11/2001. And those people have a whole history of being at odds with their host nations, with being a hostile kind of minority in a host nation. And so they always have this very hyper-aggressive, hyper-defensive kind of approach to dealing with all outgroups. And so it's no surprise that these most extreme, aggressive foreign policy people, like Victoria Nuland and the Kaplans, who are ostensibly managing the American empire, not on behalf of Israel, are still sort of hyper-aggressive. They hate hereditary enemies of the Zionists, like the Ukrainians and the Russians, and they're very happy to kill them off in large numbers. And so I think the fact that the American empire is run by people of that ethnic group, the Zionists, has a lot to do with extreme, aggressive American imperial behavior to the point of being self-defeating. The Israeli Zionists are obviously engaging in ludicrously self-defeating behavior. These people are, criminally insane. Just listen to them talk. Just listen to Israelis talk on social media. Look at the headlines in Israel. Right to rape protests, the right to rape prisoners to death with, anal rape prisoners to death with sticks is like a cause that gets huge throngs of Israeli Jews out on the streets to support it. They love to go up on the hill overlooking Gaza and watch the genocide and have a barbecue. They've been doing this for decades. Every time they mow the lawn in Gaza, these people are crazed, sick. They have that culture has been so at odds with the host nations where it's lived for so long that it has a hereditary collective psychosis. And when those people became the most powerful ethnic group in the United States, it really caused a huge problem for the American Empire and the American Republic, end of the American Republic, and it turned the American Empire into a mad dog, like a little bit like the Israeli one.
Patricia Williams, yes, China is the ultimate goal. I want to go back to 9/11 because a lot of this, what we see right now, stems from 9/11. You doing so much research on 9/11. Could you tell us your thoughts on 9/11 and how could planes evaporate and buildings implode as if they were pancaking down and bones and people just vanish, but yet you can find paper passports on the ground after steel is melted?
Yeah, you mentioned the bones. That's like one of the little known but totally obvious signs that these buildings, the two big towers in New York and Building 7, were blown to smithereens with explosives. And that is that of the nearly 3,000 people, more than 2,500 people killed that day in the towers, that I think, still over 1,000, I believe, have never been identified. That is, not even a single tiny little splinter of a toenail or bone fragment has been found. And that's pretty hard to believe, given that this was the most meticulous sifting and bucketing for human remains effort in all of human history. They went through, every little cup of dust that was what was left of the Trade Center towers, looking for those little splinters of bone and fingernails. And a lot of those victims that they identified were like from one little, fragment of a bone or a fingernail. So what happened to the other 1,000 people? We're told the official story is that these buildings collapsed. Just, like originally it was supposed to be a pancake collapse, floor. And then they threw out the pancake theory and came up with some other bizarre theory, but it was basically the same thing, just a gravity-driven collapse. Now, if a building collapses from gravity, it's going to end up with a lot of concrete floors on top of each other and squashed humans in between the floors. Happens all the time, of course. And there's never been a building collapse in all of history where people were in those buildings and a serious effort to find their remains came up with blank, right? Every human who's ever been in the collapse, like in Gaza right now, they're going through these buildings and people are going back to their neighborhoods and they're flattened and there are bodies under that rubble. Guess what? There are bodies, even if the building collapsed 2 years ago or was blown up 2 years ago, they'll find remains of those people if they want to. Well, the trade towers, what happened? More than 1,000 human bodies just magically disappeared and vanished. Where did they go? Well, we know that parts of some of them were blown far across streets to land on the tops of neighboring buildings. The Deutsche Bank building across the street from the World Trade Center towers was found many, many years later to be covered. The top had little tiny fragments of human bones all over the top of the Deutsche Bank building. You could look it up. It was a headline story at the time. Now, how did lots of little tiny fragments of human bones go from the Twin Towers over to the top and land on the Deutsche Bank building in a gravity-driven building collapse that was supposedly caused by the pillars or the columns, the steel columns that are holding these buildings up, that are holding up that vertical weight. Well, supposedly what happened was they weakened enough so that they lost the ability to hold the building up, and somehow the building came down because of that. How does that cause 1,000 human bodies to just vanish into the ether, while lots of little human bone fragments somehow end up way over on some other building across the street? I mean, it's so obvious, and yet, but people like Tucker Carlson were still, calling us crazy for talking about this stuff, like as late as like 2010, 2011, I think. He's come around now. He just put out a 5-part 9/11 Truth series, and I imagine a lot of other people are gradually coming around because, again, it's just so obvious, which is why I got involved in the first place, right? Back in the beginning of 2004, I discovered how obvious it was and said, wow, I never imagined that, they would do something, that obvious where they can, they basically got caught. They're caught. Just look, and they're caught. So, hey, people, look. But for whatever reason, a lot of people didn't want to look. So here we are, and bit by bit, Tucker finally looked, and who knows who else will.
Max M. Sparks, thank you for the $2 super chat. Patricia Williams says, do you think that 9/11 was facilitated to manufacture consent for the so-called war on terror? I don't know. Yeah,
well, I know that was definitely one of the purposes of it. Sure. Yeah. I mean, they decided to have a war on terror a long time before that, but 9/11 was the official public relations launch for the war on terror, which was an idea that Netanyahu's people came up with back in 1979, when Netanyahu convened the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism, or JCIT. You can Google that, JCIT. And he summoned some of America's biggest foreign policy heavy hitters to Jerusalem, people like Henry Scoop Jackson, who was the #1 guy in Congress at the time. And who else do they have? People, I think the usual suspects, like I think Pearl Wolfowitz, or at least one of those guys. So they brought all these people to Jerusalem and basically announced, okay, Cold War's winding down. We're going to have a new enemy for our civilization. It's going to be terrorism, meaning Muslims, meaning Palestinians. So that was the plan. And so, and it was basically openly announced at this 1979 conference. So bit by bit, they kept ratcheting it up, but they needed a big event for their spectacular, rollout for this war on Islam, meaning war on Palestine, in order to help Israel. And so they blew up the towers and got that amazing footage of buildings exploding into pyroclastic volcanic style clouds, chasing people down the streets of Manhattan. And it was out of a horror movie, and it shocked people and created this turning point in history. And that's exactly what it was designed to do. So, it wasn't just about launching the global war on terror, quote unquote. It was really about launching a sort of 100 years plus war on Islam and on the enemies of Israel. And it was designed as a Pearl Harbor style event that keeps affecting history for many generations, which is what Philip Zelikow, the head of the 9/11 Commission, was an expert in. And Zelikow is an expert in myths, public myths, he calls them, which are basically sacred stories, history turned into some kind of sacred story that motivates people and controls the way they think for generations. And that's what 9/11 was designed to do. It was designed to totally re-steer history, right? It's a kind of a mythic foundational event, like the crucifixion or alleged crucifixion or whatever. The story of the crucifixion had a huge effect. The story of the American Revolution here in the United States had this powerful effect, a foundational moment. And so this 9/11 was designed to be a foundational moment for this new Zionist-dominated world, in which the Zionists, with their captive American lapdog, are the good guys, and the enemies of the Zionists, starting with the Muslims, are the bad guys. So that's what it was designed to do.
I want to ask you more about the connection with the Zionists and what's going on with Russia. But first, I want to ask you, did they find any plane parts in the towers, or any plane parts in the Pentagon? Because it seems to me that in the videos that they showed, the thing just completely smashed, and there was no plane parts or anything.
I think there were at least some alleged plane parts found at both the in the towers, and also in New York and in Washington as well. But they've been strongly questioned about whether what was found was planted as a little bit that was planted, as opposed to the whole plane, which is what you're supposed to find. So there's still a debate about this going on. With regard to the towers, part of the problem was that, like, what you would you really had a jumbo jetliner flying into the towers at 530 miles an hour in one case and nearly 600 miles an hour in the other case, which is a very dubious speed for a commercial airliner of that type to ever be able to even reach at sea level, much less be controllable. Had that kind of crash happened, and it might have, it's possible it did, what you would expect would be that the plane would essentially disintegrate into a lot, and most of it would become very small pieces very quickly. And it would almost act like a slurry or a liquid as it kind of went into the, went around the steel, that was the steel columns, and went through the window boxes and smash, it's splattered into confetti, and that slurry of confetti is going to go through, and probably not much of it is going to make it all the way through out the other side, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to slow it down in the middle of the towers. And so what you would expect to find would be, maybe a few engine parts, like supposedly there's an engine that went right through the building and ended up over on such and such a street. I forget which street it was, and was found. And then that's been questioned, of course, by skeptics who believe it was planted. But basically whether the confetti would be found in the tower, yes, it should have been, if we had a real, like, gravity-driven collapse. Then it should, a lot of airplane confetti and squashed, human bone and stuff, and should have been found. But we didn't have a gravity-driven collapse in either of those buildings. They were both just blown to smithereens. Like I said, the human bodies turned to tiny little fragments of bone, or disintegrated into some, never found again. So that same process that caused 1,000 human bodies to basically be vaporized, or what have you, to become so blown to bits that not even a single tiny bone fragment could ever be identified, that same process probably affected whatever was left of the plane, which would have been just confetti anyway, for the most part. So it's not such an obvious thing that you can, the people who say, well, there was no wreckage, or there was not enough wreckage found in the towers. Yeah, well, you wouldn't necessarily expect that there would be. And for the Pentagon, that's another issue. And there's a whole debate about that as well. And the claims about what happened to the remains of victims and airplane that were supposedly at the Pentagon is ongoing. There's a guy named David Chandler with Scientists for 9/11 Truth, who's arguing that, yeah, big plane really did hit, and that the passengers, or most of the passengers, were apparently on it. So, and their parts of their bodies were found, or at least were DNA identified after some process, which he has confidence in, but I haven't checked out enough to have confidence in. So anyway, bottom line here is there's still a kind of a debate about the plane crashes, whether there really were crashes of the types of planes that we were told on 9/11 at which particular sites. And I think regardless of who's right in that particular debate, what we know for 100% certainty is that there were no human hijackings on 9/11. In other words, even if there were plane crashes of whatever kind of plane, clearly those planes were not flown by human hijackers, least of all the ones that they blamed, who were totally incompetent pilots who couldn't fly Cessnas. Well, the best pilot, according to the 9/11 Commission, Henny Hensher, couldn't fly a Cessna. And the notion that you would set up the most complex, difficult, controlled demolitions in history at the World Trade Center, demolitions that could only be done if you had plane crashes to excuse what happens to the building, and then leave it up to human hijackers or humans to fly planes into those buildings is ridiculous. There's no way anybody could ever have confidence that any human being would definitely follow through and, decide to go ahead and fly a plane into a building. Impossible. So if you put yourself in the mind of the perpetrators who have these buildings rigged for demolitions, they obviously had to fly planes by remote control or, whatever. Somehow they had to be 100% sure that they had those plane crashes. And some would say, or images thereof. But I don't personally, I don't think that particular avenue is very fruitful, but in any case, it's no worse than the people claiming that, the people who say that there were human hijackers are the craziest. The no-planers are less crazy than that. That's one good thing I could say about them.
Now, I want to connect this to what we're talking about with Russia today. We see that the United States has put on a full court press to weaken Russia through Ukraine and to weaken Iran and to weaken China. Now, as you said earlier, that the crazies, the Zionists, run the foreign policy of the United States. Just like you understand that, Russia should understand that, and I don't understand why Russia allows the Zionists to give weapons to Russia's enemies without reciprocating that to them. Why would Russia be so passive in knowing that when Georgia attacked the Russian peacekeepers, that they were armed, trained, and they were I think in Saakashvili's cabinet there were Israeli or Zionist advisors and stuff when that took place. When we look at what's going on, all of the allies of Russia are being taken out. Libya, Iraq, all of them that traded with Russia. Why would Russia be so passive, knowing that the Zionists are in control, and yet they do nothing or little to nothing to confront the Zionists head on?
Yeah, I think it's a power calculation. I think that the Russian leadership looks at the power that these Zionists have, the power over the U.S. government and the most extreme militaristic, aggressive wing of the U.S. government, the power that Zionists have over organized crime worldwide. And organized crime is, governments have to deal with it. If you're working for the government, there are rules about what you can do and what you can't do. And if you're an organized crime, there's pretty much no rules. So people who are, very highly skilled in destructive arts, in killing and stealing and lying and deceiving, those people can sometimes make more money in the private sector. That's called organized crime. So if you were really good at causing plane crashes, for example, you could go and work for the CIA for a government salary. And by, the time you retired, you'd be up to I forget those letters, J2 or whatever, you draw a decent pension. You'd be making, you might get up to six-figure salary, low six figures, whatever. But if you are an independent operator causing plane crashes for both really wealthy people, if they ask for it, for the World Bank, if they ask for it, for other organized crime rings, if they ask for it, and for governments, if they ask for it. The United States government wants a plane to go down carrying a leader of a Latin American country, and that's happened several times. The so-called asteroids, John Perkins wrote about that. He's author of Confessions of Economic Hitman, right? He was friends with these guys who caused these plane crashes. Killed Perkins' friends, heads of state in Latin America were killed by other friends of Perkins. He knew both sides. He knew the victims, the presidents of Central American and South American countries who were murdered in rigged plane crashes, and he knew the jackals or asteroids, these professional killers who had killed them. And so these asteroid jackal types and others with lethal skills, with money stealing skills and lying skills and deceiving skills, these people can make probably more money by being sort of contractors rather than going and working for the government and getting a salary as a government employee. So Guess what? There are tons of people like that, as well as big money people who finance them and buy them and employ them, who happen to be of the Zionist ethnicity, which all those people of that ethnicity have a long history of working together against others. And like, any organized crime group, right? You look at mafias, you get, ethnic mafias, right? You got Crips of the Bloods, you got the Lucky Lucianos, you got the Joe Kennedys, the Irish, the Italians, African Americans, whatever. People kind of cling together with people they can trust and relate to do their organized crime thing. Well, the Zionist ethnicity has this history of dominating organized crime wherever they go for thousands of years, and so they got power. Your plane could go down or whatever. I mean, stuff can happen to you if you go up against them. Charlie Kirk found that out the hard way, as so many people have. And so, if you're Putin, you look at this situation. It's a big chessboard, and you're basically playing chess to try to get the best deal for your people. And you've done an okay job. You brought them back from a horrific situation in the 1990s, and they're on the upswing. And you're investing in Libya, you're investing in Syria, you're investing in Iran, you're investing in relations with Russia, and you're investing in trying to get the Americans and the Zionists off your neck. And so you're playing that chess game. There's a certain level where you don't want to go further than this in antagonizing these Zionists, because they've got power to make the U.S. do bad things to you. They've got the power to make, highly skilled, very destructive people do bad things to you. And so if you're Putin, you're playing this game like, how far can I go against them until, I'm taking unacceptable risks that won't work on this chessboard. I think that's the answer. And remember, Russia is, full of ethnically Jewish people. And that ethnicity totally dominated Russian organized crime, which is why when the Soviet Union ended, basically the only rich people were criminals, because you weren't allowed to get rich legally. It was illegal to make a lot of money in the Soviet Union. But there were billionaires. They were all criminals. And they were all Jewish. Not all, but almost all. And so 7 of the 8 criminal Jewish oligarchs who stripped the Soviet Union of everything that was valuable with their American friends after the end of the Cold War were Jewish and Israeli dual citizens. And so there are huge numbers of powerful, wealthy, corrupt, networking people of that persuasion still in Russia. And then like 1 million or 2 of them have gone to Israel, and there they are in Israel. And they work with each other between Israel and Russia. And, that group has a lot of more people in powerful positions than other groups do proportionately. And so the Russian leadership has to be really careful, right? Putin reeled in some of those oligarchs. He killed a couple. He killed one, imprisoned another, and got the word out to the rest that they've got to play team ball. They can't completely kill the Russian goose that lays the golden eggs anymore. But he's reeled them in some. But I guess he's probably being a little careful about he sees what they do against him, but responding with great harshness could cause him a lot of trouble. So I think that's what he's thinking.
Red Panda Pie says since this event, talking about 9/11, people lost their critical mind, just believe what it said, and that brought, since we're coming to an end, that brought something to mind. I had a show yesterday, and I think it was with Brian Barrett earlier yesterday, and I was talking. It was either Brian Barrett or it was, because I had 2 shows yesterday, or it was with Alex Craner, and I was talking about statistics. I brought up statistics, and there was a guy in the comments section was mad at me for bringing up the statistics, and he said he blamed it all on immigrants or illegals and stuff. And I said, listen, the HUD office said that they did a study and said that $20 billion could eradicate homelessness, plus another 20+ billion could totally eradicate poverty across the United States. And the guy says, instead of listening to what was said when I said, well, the United States gave 1.7 billion more than what was needed to eradicate homelessness in America. The U.S. gave 1.7 billion more to Israel during the Gaza extermination process that went on. And he blamed it on migrants and immigrants that the government gave Israel $21.7 billion. And it blew my mind. I couldn't address it at the show because there were so many things going on, but I couldn't address it at the time. The critical thinking skills have gone out the window in the United States, and it is always to the extreme. Someone is to this extreme or to that extreme, and it seems like they don't comprehend because they place their faith so much in a person or in an organization or in a party. What do you have to say about that in closing?
Yeah, that's right. I think 9/11 was partly designed to short circuit critical thinking skills. The neoconservatives, they followed Joseph Strauss or Leo Strauss, a philosopher who believed that truth should never be spoken in public, that critical thinking should be reserved for the elite, especially the Jews, and that the goyim cattle, or the ordinary people, should be brainwashed with projections on the walls of Plato's cave. And so that's their philosophy. They don't believe in critical thinking. They don't believe in mass education. They don't believe in having a smart citizenry. So yeah, 9/11 was designed to do that. It was a pseudo-religious event. It was like a new crucifixion or Holocaust or whatever. The Holocaust itself was turned into a new crucifixion by the Jewish storytellers. Mm-hmm. And it was designed to turn people into the equivalent of dogmatic fundamentalists who can't think. And it worked pretty well. Because if you do something like that so obviously right out in the open, and then create this taboo so nobody can question it, you've just stopped people from thinking. If you, like Lynn Margulis, the National Medal of Science winner, said 9/11 ended science. There's been no science since 9/11, because any reasonable critical inquiry, least of all scientific inquiry into the demolitions and so on, would show. It just shows so obviously what happened. So yeah, that's a really good comment. Absolutely right. And as far as the extremism goes, I'm not sure that was intended. I think that's kind of maybe an unintended consequence that things have I think a dumbed down country that's not thinking critically is, of course, more likely to be led astray by demagogues. And the world has, the leaders have become a lot more demagogic, Trump being an extreme example, but the rest of them too, Biden, Harris, they're all blah, 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 not really saying anything specific or coherent or logical, but just kind of tossing out bromides, sound bites, red meat for their followers. And so, yeah, people have been dumbed down. They've gotten more polarized. The Trump cult that hates the immigrants and blames the immigrants for everything, even things that have nothing to do with immigration, is a very good example. So yeah, I think you and your comment or friend or whatever were right.
Well, the last question of the day, because I know you have to run. What is your perspective on this? Because the dumbing down of the populace may benefit some for a little bit, but it also lays thermite at the base of society, because there is no way that you can keep your society civilized without proper education, and there's no way for that civilization to grow and progress into the future and excel if you have a dumbed down mass populace, while you only have a few at the top that are feeding like parasites off the masses of the people.
Right. That's the sort of post-Enlightenment philosophy that's dominated. The United States was founded on it. Europe came around to it. And it goes with the belief in progress through education, progress through learning more and more about how the world really works, and working out our differences rationally, negotiating, all of that, faith in reason in the Enlightenment. And that got challenged by the postmodern philosophers. It's been challenged by the traditionalist philosophers, and I think they actually had a pretty strong case about some of the inherent flaws. But yeah, I think that progress through education and critical thinking, it worked for a while, but now it's on the downslope, and it might be because civilizations just do rise and fall, and we just happen to be on the downslope. And it's a lot. The reasons for it are so intermingled and complicated, and there's not much that anybody can do about it. Unfortunately, that may be the case. But I think that if there's a solution, it's not going to be a return to Enlightenment values, but I think it's more likely to involve some kind of mass spiritual breakout in which somehow people contagiously realize that we are spiritual beings having a material experience. Therefore, we no longer fear death. Therefore, we no longer fear these psychopathic power mongers and Zionists who can assassinate people they don't like and so on. We don't care, because actually, Muslims know this, that hey, if the bad guys kill you, you're like the best kind of martyr and you're in the highest level of paradise. That's the way we describe it simply. But if once you have a spiritual experience and you know that that's the reality, then you're a different person in a different world. And then maybe we could recreate some of the benefits that we've gotten from this post-Enlightenment civilization in a way that really works. So I think the spiritual experience and a mass spiritual breakout is the one hope. Now, how that happens, I don't know. If maybe I'm in Morocco, the hotbed of Sufism. So maybe if you take your tasbih, your rosary, and you do your la ilaha illallah enough, maybe you'll be catapulted into the state of consciousness where you can join the mass spiritual breakout. Okay, that's my preaching for the day.
Once again, thank you, Professor, for joining us. I really want to say shukram for joining me on this platform today, and may you be blessed.
Well, blessings right back at you, Rashid. Alaikum assalam, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much. Everybody listen. Remember, as I often say, do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or because some accolades may follow. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, that God Almighty is watching you. As my mother always said, God sits high, but he looks low. Before we go further, I also want you all to join us. We'll have Dr. Paul Craig Roberts on the platform. I believe it's tomorrow. It's either tomorrow or Thursday. As a matter of fact, before we go off the show, let me look. Okay, let me go to the thing. Live. Let's go to live real quick. I think we have today is the 14th. So Thursday we'll have tomorrow we'll have a live stream. Thursday we'll have Dr. Paul Craig Roberts at 9 a.m. in the morning. And then at 11 a.m. we'll have Lawrence Freeman on for Patreon and channel members. And then we'll have probably a live show Friday. So I want to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart to the depth of my soul for giving me your time, because time is the most precious and most valuable commodity. It's an unrenewable resource. So when you spend your time, that's why they call it spending time. I hope that when you spend your time on this platform, you get an equal or greater return. I hope you get that value. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make you think throughout all of the clouds and the fog and the madness of propaganda and innuendo and all of this extremists. We want you to be able to think, to position you and your family better to survive the fall of the American empire and the collapse of the Western world. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong. Stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share, and go over to all of the platforms and do the same. I really appreciate you all. This is my love to you. I send it out from my lips to God is. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. We're out of here. Peace.
Walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking you're just